All right, so we are going to be running another program design workshop after the Open. We did one a few months ago that was focused on designing strength workouts for functional fitness athletes. This time we're going to focus more on conditioning. That was the second most requested topic. So figured we'd make that one our second workshop since the first one was actually pretty fun. And the way this works, it's a small group of folks. We're still kind of running this on a relatively experimental level where do weekly meetings, get together on some calls with myself, John, and Luke, and go over programs, go over some big picture ideas, a lot of practical stuff, right? We really want to turn these workshops into a situation where people are able to design programs, bring problems they're working on with athletes, do homework assignments. And then we spend most of the time actually picking that stuff apart, answering questions, and trying to make it very, very practical rather than kind of, head in the clouds, difficult to implement, weird exercises, all that kind of stuff. So if you are interested in that, make sure you're signed up for our email list. You can do that at legionsc.com. We're just starting to send out some details now. Again, we're going to start this thing after the Open, relatively small group of people, get better at designing conditioning workouts. Hope to see you there. Welcome to the Legion Strength and Conditioning Podcast. You can check us out at legionsc.com or follow us on Instagram at legion.sc. All right, so today we're going to talk about some of the back end of the coach-athlete relationship in a remote coaching situation. So I know I've been doing remote coaching for athletes and in-person coaching for athletes for quite a long time now, Luke. I think it's the same thing for you. And when developing these remote coaching relationships, there's several different things that I've seen are a priority that are really, really important to make sure that that relationship is positive for both the coach and the athlete. And I've seen several things that if they go wrong, that relationship can start to sour and the overall coaching dynamic doesn't particularly go well. And I know that a lot of the folks who listen to this podcast are athletes themselves, potentially some who are working one-on-one with a remote coach, some who are following more of like a templated program. And I know a lot of the folks who listen are coaches who coach athletes, coaches who design programs for athletes, personal trainers, some of whom are potentially moving into more of a remote coaching relationship with some of their clients, and then people in between, right? People who are coaches and athletes at the same time. So I think there's a lot of thought that goes into how these relationships should function and what works well and what doesn't work well. So we figured that we'd kind of lay out, again, what we've seen as priorities as far as maintaining those relationships. So Luke, what do you think? What are the big buckets that are important to you in developing a coach-athlete relationship, particularly with like remote athletes or program design athletes?
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, when whether they're a coach sort of just starting to get into it, it's very much on the surface is about creating programs and sending out programs, responding to questions, making sure that things are clear. But over time, it was very, very much like that for me in the beginning, but over time, I sort of understood that I had a bit of a different relationship with all of my athletes, and they obviously had very specific goals and things that they were wanting to achieve, and my role was a little bit different with each person. There's obviously, some broad principles which that I operate by and which are very, very helpful, but I do think that it's really important that, first off, the coaches understanding that this isn't, some cookie cutter relationship that they're going to have with an individual. It obviously depends on like the setup. I understand that there's sort of coaching products out there which limit the amount of communication. Maybe there is no communication. Maybe it's just the program and communication through that. But if you're sort of in that more, you're offering personalized programming, and you sort of have this open communication channel, which I think is becoming a lot more popular now. I think it's really important that as a coach, you obviously set boundaries and limits in terms of like how you when you communicate. I think time is a huge one. A lot of people, obviously, if you're coaching people from all over around the world, your phone could be buzzing up all the time. But sort of creating systems that allow you to give the best service possible, and just make sure that like you're consistent. And what the athlete mainly is looking for is to trust that you will give them an objective view in what they want. So if they want to have fun, you will try to deliver a program that is fun. If they want to have certain performance, then you're going to provide a program which will build to that performance. They want to sort of hand over responsibility of the sort of thinking and of what they need to do, and they want to make sure that they're doing the most optimal thing for them, and they sort of want to have the ability not to sort of worry about that. But the process is super key, and I think that there's you hear a lot all the time of the best program in the world performed incorrectly, or with the wrong intention is not going to be effective, and I think that's super important. And sometimes there's a lot of education around the process, and also just understanding sometimes there are big limitations within your role as a coach. You're not able to have such a great influence in their training as if you were an in-person coach and you were seeing them in session. And as well as that, there's certain things that you may value as a coach that the athlete just might not be willing to do. So a key one may be something like sleep and nutrition, and these things we all understand that these are really, really important. And I like sort of talking from first-hand experience, I sort of give my athletes a weekly check-in to sort of review over some of these factors. And I've got some clients who just don't do it, and they've just stopped doing it. So I just stopped sort of trying to, have that conversation with them or open that dialogue, because it's just something that they don't necessarily value. But what they do value is, making sure they get their workouts on time, making sure that if they have questions, they're getting answered within a certain time frame. And for each individual, it's going to be a little bit different. And I think sometimes what can happen quite often, and it's really common in coaching, is you sort of start to learn something, you start to appreciate something, and you have a bit more of a different perspective and lens on your role as a coach and some of the things that you can help people with. And we want to be able to help people through these sort of new perspectives and try things out. But a lot of the time, sometimes those things might not be necessarily something that individual is willing to vibe with. It might be something that they just don't really have any value with. I would say that, for me personally, I sort of have 3 avatars of individuals that I coach. I've sort of got the beginner athlete. For those individuals, they sort of do work off of a very, general plan with the goal of trying to just build training volume and training experience. And with time, they will develop sort of, those areas, the sort of strengths and weaknesses. Obviously, if there's something that really needs to be worked on, then that is the goal. But what I try to do is let people sort of, get some training volume under their belt and sort of almost form that for themselves. Through a good balance and a good approach, but a real big key on the education around the process, and just make sure that people are going through that. And then with time, people can become more autonomous, and this sort of moves into that second avatar. I've got individuals where the program design element is a lot more of a collaboration. It's a lot more of just a conversation every month of like, okay, where are we at? How are you feeling? What are some of the things that challenged you? Are there any movements which you just feel a little bit, you're not super confident with? Because I do think that with more experienced athletes, it's really important to give them their sort of stamp on the program, because quite often what ends up happening is we can sort of get caught up in our own sort of narrative of what this athlete needs to do, and sometimes working on something that maybe they don't actually need to do, but something that will bring up their confidence can actually have a better overall effect on their performance than if they were following the most individualized perfect program. The perfect program doesn't exist, by the way, guys. But the confidence element, especially in a sport like CrossFit, I think is really, really important. And if there's certain things that people like to do, they may just want to be able to do them. If someone doesn't necessarily need to bench press, but they like to do it once a week, it's like, okay, well, let's figure out a way for you to do that, without getting elbow, shoulder tendonitis or anything like that. Let's just give you that little something to look forward to each week. Some of those pieces are really important, and obviously this is going to be something that you what I've experienced with my more experienced athletes. But like I said, it's more of a collaboration. and it's more of a conversation month to month, with myself taking a lead on sort of the overall general direction of things. And then I work with individuals who are more sort of general population, and for them it's a lot more of a focus on the other areas of their life, the energy that they have at work, maybe some of the sporting activities or the certain things that they want to go through. I've got one client who likes to go surfing in the summer, and then in the winter he likes to go mountaineering. So it's like, okay, well, we just adjust the training. Things are just pretty much general strength and conditioning, but we adjust it to do the things that he feels that he needs to have in that, and he takes a lead on that. And it's very much about trying to make sure that the training sort of fits his travel schedule and his work schedule. And he may be sat down on a train, going from city to city in the UK on one day of the week where he's got to go to meetings. So it's like, okay, well, you've been sat down for that lot, so let's make sure that your training is not necessarily going to be asking too much of you the next day. But big key there is each of those athletes or those three avatars, they need something different. And the role of the coach is very much to be able to give that to them. And it's not about being dogmatic about the way you approach things. Every single, because it is natural for coaches to think, okay, I need to try to systemize this and make this easier for myself to deliver. And I think that that's just like a natural thing if people want to be able to progress. But a lot of the times that I've tried to do that within the sort of more coaching, you could say my coaching approach, more times I've tried to do that, it's never really worked. And what I think is important is having, say, systems and things like that around, communication planning and that type of thing. But then making sure that your relationship with the athlete is an individual relationship. It's something that, you have to be able to empathize with the situations that are going through in life and in training and things like that. And then you need to be able to relate to them. And I think it can be quite difficult to sort of develop that, but over time it's something that is a skill that you practice as well. It's just picking up on things, and it's writing things down and capturing information just so you can remember things and you can bring it back to the next call and things like that. But with all that said, let's move on to some stuff that's a little bit more actionable in terms of information. One of the big key things that I think is really, really important is communication. And this is something I've had discussions with other coaches, and a lot of the time, coaches can find it quite difficult to either, have systemized communication or just have like a process for how they communicate with athletes. And also just sort of the expectations, because you want to, especially if the new coach is starting out, you want to keep it open-ended, you want to be there, you want to be available and things like that, but you also don't necessarily want to be putting yourself in a situation where you develop bad habits and then it takes you to like undo a lot of things and change potentially the service that someone is getting in order to give yourself something that's a little bit more sustainable. So what are some of your thoughts and processes around communication, Todd?
Yeah, I think that what you're touching on there is something that most people who have done remote coaching have experienced themselves or seen people do. And I see people make basically the two extreme mistakes somewhat regularly when it comes to communication with athletes, right? And I think you started to hint at those. One of them is, communicating all the time with all of your athletes, constantly texting everyone, modifying workouts for people on the fly all throughout the day, and that those coaches end up just in this black hole of work that they can sort of never get out of, right? That the expectation is set, that they're going to sort of handhold their athletes through every single thing that the athlete is doing, that the athletes have no autonomy in terms of modifying their own training or moving stuff around, that the coach is there to give them immediate feedback on all of their training results. And this is kind of like weird codependent sort of like nasty relationship, right? And that's obviously not ideal. And I don't think that's good for the coach or for the athlete. And on the other hand, you have coaches who are like, here's my boundaries. You can only send me one email per week, and I will not be responding to texts other than in this specific window. And then they just come off as like a weird dick. where it's like, dude, just like, I just want to know if it's okay if I like move this training day over here. Like, can you just tell me yes or no? Right. And, I think that those people are, well, I'm setting my boundaries and I'm just being, very forthright with how this is going to work. And it just makes athletes sort of upset, and they're like, what's wrong with you, dude? Like, I literally just want to know this one thing. Come on. I mean, those are obviously extreme cases, but you see both of those happening all the time. And to your point, right, I think it's just that the dynamics of communication aren't established in a way that actually makes sense, right? That athletes don't understand what the situation is for the coach, and coaches don't have a good understanding of what the situation is for the athlete. And I think that comes down to what you were talking about earlier, which is, I think, one of the first things that you said, which is trust, right? If there's a foundation of trust in a coach-athlete relationship, then these communication things can be worked out in a way that actually makes sense, where it's like, hey, listen, here's what you can expect from me. I'm going to provide you detailed feedback on your training results at least once per week. If you just have general comments and concerns, go ahead and put them in your training. I'll answer all your questions, review all your videos when I do the detailed training review. If you have sort of like a general non-urgent question, just send me an email. I generally process my email roughly once a day and respond to everyone who reaches out to me. If you have like an urgent question, go ahead and text me. But if it's something that's detailed and requires me to watch a bunch of videos but isn't urgent, like just keep that in an email. Because if you text me, like I'll try to get back to you right away if it's something that you need an answer on. But if it's like some weird complicated thing and you want me to watch videos, like I'm going to forget to do it because you're going to text me in between meetings, and it's just not going to happen, right? And if you have trust with an athlete and you explain as a coach, like, hey, here's how communication works well for me in a way that results in you getting what you want, then that athlete, I mean, most people understand that. They're like, okay, cool. Yeah, that makes sense. I also have a job, and I understand that it's annoying if a coworker tells me something in passing that should be in an email. I understand that it's annoying if a coworker texts me something that they should have come over and told me because it's immediately urgent and I need to do it right now, right? Like the people have an intuition for how communication should work and ways that communication goes wrong for them in their own lives. So, that foundation of trust then facilitates appropriate communication, which then facilitates, actually getting good results, communication back and forth, good adjustments to training back and forth, et cetera. So, the one thing I did want to ask you, Luke, you mentioned trust right away. How do you build trust in those coach-athlete relationships, right? Because that's, if the trust isn't there, it doesn't matter how good all these conversations are, because like, it's just not going to build anything.
Yeah, like I think obviously the trust, I think, it comes with time. If, say, for instance, and I've found this with individuals who are referrals, there's obviously some level of trust that's already been established. So generally speaking, those people who come through other clients are clients who I work with for a lot longer and tend to have this sort of ability just to get things rolling and going a lot quicker, because of there's sort of a bit of a sort of, you could say, secondhand trust being sort of built there. But it takes time, and the biggest thing is being consistent, and it's just being consistent with how you operate and how you communicate and what is expected of you. I think if you find that an easy one is if the client can sort of see on face value there's inconsistency with how you're going about things, then with time that trust erodes. And this could be, see, for instance, programming being sort of done a couple of days at a time, and that doesn't necessarily build the trust of my program is written at least 1 week at a time, which I think is something that a lot of people can understand the reasons and the benefits to that around planning. So I've heard of people doing that, and I think that sometimes that isn't the sort of best way to go about it. You sort of need to figure out what are the expectations first and foremost from the athlete, And a lot of that comes from the conversation that you have with them, or hopefully you do have a conversation with them when you start off, and you have a bit of a catch up, and you sort of explain the process to them. And from explaining the process to them, you can explain the process to them, and it can be really super broad, but then you obviously have your own way of operating. Maybe you have different ways of operating with different types of clients, but the key is being consistent with that individual. So if you're constantly on the phone texting them and responding to everything, they're going to start to think that that's the way you go about things, and they're going to expect that of you. And then as soon as you're like, oh crap, I've got a lot more clientele now, and now I need to sort of try to make sure I'm a little bit more systemized in this, and I can't respond as quickly, and you try to then develop something, it's like you'll scale it, you're sort of pulling back on the quality of the service, essentially, and now that experience for them has been inconsistent, and that will erode trust. And I think I think a lot of people are worried that trust comes from results. It comes from real very black and white numbers and this type of stuff. It's like, yeah, but it doesn't necessarily. I think the biggest thing that I've found as a coach is I think the most important thing that you can give an athlete is, a sense of direction. Obviously, they want to be progressing, and you want to make sure that you're consistent and you're there for them. I think more so than the results, because I think that them having a trust in that whole process, you being consistent through that whole thing, that has potential of creating the results on the back end. Whereas if you are up and down in terms of your communication, if the athlete is expecting one thing and they're receiving another thing, that sort of just pulls away from how much they're invested into it. They're not going to pay attention to the things you give them. When you do give feedback, probably not going to listen to it, because they're just going to feel that it's not necessarily sort of genuine, but it's I'm not sure if that's the right word, but they may feel that it's not coming from a place that they want it to be coming from, and then they're probably not going to be paying attention to it. But yeah, I think communication is probably the easiest thing that you can start to build trust with, because it's very much at the forefront of the role as a coach. It's really important that if people are texting you and that type of stuff, I think the sort of process that you went through, Todd, is something that's very similar to mine, where it's like non-urgent things, put it on True Coach, maybe text me, but I'm not going to get back to it, potentially, but if it's something urgent, I'll get back to it as soon as I can. And I tell clients that I don't check my phone all day. I don't have notifications on my phone, and I tell them that okay, I go on to look at stuff at certain points in the day, and that allows me to focus on your programs and delivering what you guys see every day. And I think the sort of communication at the very first part, giving feedback on the same day every week, whether that's early in the week, at the end of the week, whatever it is, I think that's important. And just being upfront and sort of being able to say, it's just being sort of transparent to a certain degree as well. I think that's a key thing as well, is sort of just explaining things to people, and doing so in a way which is with a view of, we want to do this properly now so that this works really well. And one of the things I tell clients early on is that the first 3 months is just a period of just trying to sort of acclimate and try to what's the there's what do we say in the I think we say in the UK something different, but
let's hear that British colloquialism.
No. Is it acclimate is a very American thing, and I feel
like acclimate is good. That's fine.
Acclimatize, that's it. Acclimatize.
Okay. Aluminium.
Yeah.
The aluminium has acclimatized.
Yeah. So you got that first 3 month period to acclimatize. Sounds like they're going to to like a training camp at high sea level or whatever. But you got that first period of time to acclimate and just get used to things, and then the sort of ball starts rolling. And I think that I'm pretty upfront with that. I'm like, don't be expecting things to sort of be, wham bam and PRs, PBs and maxes and everything like that for the first couple of months. It's probably not good to expect that in general. It's just like, those things will come when they come. But that's key. If you're trying to just tell people, okay, look, this is where we want to be, and this is the reason why we're going through this, as opposed to sort of just being like, this is why we do it, or more of just like, no, we do it this way. If you're sort of that type of individual who is more authoritative in the sort of way that you lead, I don't think that's necessarily going to be a good approach with this sort of one-to-one individual coaching. You sort of have to, it's more of like a collaboration. It's more of a moving together forward. It's not, okay, this is where we want to be, do as I say, and you're going to get there. Because as soon as that happens, especially like a lot of the time as well, it's like you got to understand, it's like most of the time we're dealing with adults. We're dealing with people who have got, professional lives and things that demand a lot of them. And then, if they've got some coach who's, telling them to do, they may see it as like, they're just telling me to do burpees and thrusters, and they're being a bit of a dick about it. That's like, that's not cool for them. I don't know if that answers your question, Todd.
Yeah. Well, I do think that, you started to touch on the idea of the sort of more authoritarian coach, right? And that's, I think, the avatar that a lot of people have of what a coach is in their brains. I certainly remember playing club soccer as a child. And, one of the kids on our team, his dad was the coach. He clearly, in retrospect, just had no idea what he was doing, right? He's just like some dad who ended up coaching these kids who were pretty good at soccer. And this guy would just yell at us all the time, right? It's like in his head, he's like, well, I guess I'm the coach and I need to show these kids who's boss. So I'm just going to yell at them, right? It was just absurd. Like the stuff that we would do as children playing a sport is just completely outrageous. And, I think that's the type of thing that people sort of have in their heads of like, oh, this is how you coach. You gotta show him who's boss and tell him what to do, right? And that's not terribly effective. And then on the other end, you do have people who are kind of like, demonstrating some dark triad traits, some weirdly manipulative stuff, and are really controlling and, authoritarian with their athletes. And it can actually work pretty well. There are situations where that has worked extremely well and people have performed at a very high level in that type of relationship. They may have come out of it damaged, right? You do see a lot of that with Olympic athletes, people who have achieved extreme accomplishments in sports, and then they come out with tell-all memoirs years later that are like, my coach did really really bad stuff to me. And that's, you don't like to hear that, but it is something that has regularly achieved high levels of performance. But the other side of that is all the people who it doesn't work for, right? And if you're in a situation where, you're not necessarily coaching the very best of the best, and you can just sort of kick people out who aren't performing at the level that you want, that's a pretty ineffective way to actually build relationships with people and have a good coaching situation for people who, like you said, who have a job, who want to just kind of get better at something that they enjoy, who don't respond well to weird manipulation and yelling and stuff like that. So I think it's really important to realize how much the sort of day-to-day, like you said, communication, the consistency of hey, I'm going to review your results on these days. How do you respond when an athlete starts to get upset and worried about the results not being where they want to be? How do you respond when an athlete, sends you a flurry of weird texts because they're freaking out about something? How do you respond when something does come up for you, for example, where it's like, hey, listen, I have this stuff going on. I'm not going to get your stuff to you as normal. I'm just going to send you 2 days right now, and I'll get back to you with the rest of the week on Wednesday or whatever, right? It's those little things. And I sort of hate when people are like, oh, it's the little things, right? But it kind of is. It's this series of pieces of communication, of handling the adversities that come up in any sort of normal relationship, of handling the adversities that come up in training of reacting to emotions from an athlete seeing how a coach responds to challenges that they're experiencing in their own life. That accumulation of those pieces, like repeatedly being handled in a way that, is transparent and somewhat reasonable, I think that that's what actually builds that trust. And it's not a matter of maintaining an authority over an athlete. It's a matter of sort of showing like, hey, this is how we do things. This is what we're working on. I'm willing to work with you on something that's important to you. And you're just going to see consistency from me and transparency over and over and over again. And that over time, that's when you can get that buy-in, to hopefully make changes that actually benefit that athlete significantly long-term.
Yeah, like the leadership styles, I think is really, I don't necessarily think the authoritative sort of that type of coaching is, I don't know how to describe it. If someone is shouting at you over email or over an online relationship, it's a lot easier to be like, fuck this. No, yeah. I don't want to do it. But I think that, I mean,
although I will say, because I've seen coaches who do that, right? Who do that weird authoritarian stuff, and especially in a remote coaching relationship, it doesn't tend to manifest itself as much as like shouting, right? As like weird manipulation stuff. It looks like an abusive relationship where the coach is like withholding information, like withholding, like not necessarily affection in a coaching relationship, right? But like withholding approval, like creating uncertainty in the athlete, making them feel like they don't know what's going on and that they're like stupid and bad, and that the coach is sort of like testing them. And then the coach is like, oh, you passed my test, so I'll give you a little bit of approval. Like, oh, I didn't do what I was supposed to as a coach, so I'm going to make you think it's your fault and I'm just testing you. And I'm going to give you a bunch of approval. Like it's weird. It's actually like kind of sickening, honestly. But I've seen that multiple different times in multiple different scenarios, and like it just creeps me out, man. To be honest.
Yeah, I have actually seen people being quite controlling as coaches. Yeah, totally. And I think that like sometimes, like I mean, when people are hiring a coach, it's not getting online coaching or remote coaching, individualized coaching, whatever you want to call it. That sort of upper end type product isn't cheap, and it also takes a lot to make the decision to sort of do that. And a lot of people make those decisions and they are like, okay, I'm going to trust everything you do. Like, for example, I helped someone out doing sort of like weightlifting, in like a one-to-one session when I was working at a gym, and that individual was like, yeah, I shouldn't really be doing this. And I was like, what? And it was like, yeah, my coach doesn't want me to be doing anything with another coach. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, all right. And it's like, I don't know, it just felt quite weird. And I was like, if there's one thing as a coach, like that you should be sort of encouraging, I think, is sort of trying to get your athletes, especially if there's something technical, is just like get eyes on, because any eyes on, if it comes from someone who, and I try to like make sure that those types of things are really easy for my clients to sort of access and ask. I've got clients who jump into classes. I've got like sort of more competitive style classes because they need that competitive experience. And I've also even encouraged athletes, like at a point where I feel like I'm not able to sort of help them in a certain area. It's like, okay, well, you need this, and it can be quite difficult for a coach to be like, essentially handing that type of stuff over. But yeah, I've seen that sort of weird stuff where it's like, you can't train with other people, you can't do this. And it's like, hey, at the end of the day, like when you do these competitions, you need to have like the ability to be able to push. A lot of the time, for a lot of people, it's about, playing your game. And the only people who are racing in these types of workouts are the people who are sort of, going for first and second, depending obviously on how, if we think about the CrossFit Games, it's more of a fight for 2 down to 5. But away from that, I do think that it's super important that people get used to sort of that competitive experience and sort of getting beat. I know we were having a conversation the other day talked about, people getting wrapped up in their numbers and identity around that. And, a big part of that is just actually just exposing yourself to those competitive experiences. Getting a little bit off topic here, but yeah, I think the leadership styles is quite an interesting one. And I think as a coach, what has worked really well for me is just sort of being like, okay, hey, this is a bit of a journey. We're going to go on through this together, and it's just, we're going to make sure that we're good at each stage. It's not about, me enforcing a system on you, like you're an individual, and it's about making sure that you get what you need from this. I have worked with athletes who want someone to be a lot more like authoritative and tell them like, you need to do this, or, put these very clear cut performance metrics in front of them to be able to sort of chase, because it helps with how they approach things. And I've sort of had to pull back a little bit on that as well and say that that's not my style. I don't necessarily agree with that, and I don't think you're going to be getting what you think you'll get from that. I think, which is, I think is something that people, I think people can, I think if people are training hard and they're working on the things that they need to work on, and they're really, really consistent in terms of like how they're showing up, that is the key thing. And your role as a coach is to do that, and it's not to put too much emphasis into the individual session, into the results, into that type of stuff. It's about making sure that you sort of take care of like the little things like the communication, answering the questions and doing all that type of stuff. But at the same time, always having in the back of your head, like, okay, what do I need to do to make sure that we have the longest amount of improvement for as long as possible? It's not about creating these huge spikes in performance. It's about trying to make sure that people are set up in a position where they can keep this thing going for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, that's the, we've said it before, that's the simple solution to the complex problem, right? Where the athlete thinks that the simple solution to the complex problem of improving their performance is a coach telling them exactly what they need to do on everything all the time, right? Like, these are your splits. This is the time that you need to get on this exact workout. This is the simple way to achieve exactly what you need to achieve in each session to get to the result that you want, right? And that shows no understanding of the complexity of training and adaptation. But like you said, I mean, there's people who want that's their model of how things should work. And if they're not going to get it from you as a coach, they're going to go find someone who will give it to them. And there are coaches who will give it to them, and that's okay, right? And it's just a matter of understanding that your methods as a coach need to align with your beliefs as a coach. And if you're like, yo, it doesn't work that way, like, and I'm not just going to tell you every single time exactly what your split should be and exactly where your performance should be and exactly how you should split your handstand push-ups, like that's just not how things work. That, some athletes will sort of learn. They'll be like, okay, I don't necessarily agree with you, and this is what I want, but I trust you enough to at least buy into the process. And others won't, and they'll go find someone else. And you just have to be okay with that, I think.
Yeah, it is interesting because I think I've spoken to individuals who sort of come from maybe like individual sports, or sometimes not from like a sporting background, and there's almost this sort of like element of that. There's definitely some expectations around that, because I think that they see the relationship as like, I'm trying to think of as like they see it as like sort of one of these fairy tale, sports superstar with a trusted coach who's there giving them clear directions, and like Rocky and Mickey, right? They see it as like that type of relationship, whereas it's like hey, I mean, you're in a different continent. It's quite difficult to be able to do that, right? But I have noticed there's a lot of other people, because there's a lot of nuance within it, and I suppose that I try to get across to my athletes that it's a lot more grey than people want it to be, and it's the main thing is just turning up each day, and there's certain things that we can do along the way to make that easier for you. If you need a bit of a metric here or there in your training, like, hey, try to do these unbroken, or hey, try to do this, but with an emphasis on the try to, because otherwise, if you're like, this is what you need to do it, It's just like, you don't know what's going on. You don't know how much sleep they got the day before. You don't know, all the sort of underlying things that can potentially stop them from being able to do that. And then what is actually going to happen when they don't do it? What is going to happen when they actually go through that? Potentially that erodes trust when they're unable to perform the way that you potentially saw them to do that. And I think that a lot of the time, you were sort of talking just then about the coaching style of like putting out metrics and putting out things and expectations and stuff like that. I do think that a lot of coaching is about observing things. It's about observing things, trying to make sure that the overall stimulus is moving in a certain direction, observing it. Okay, where did we see that? Okay, let's move on to the next thing. And that's the reason why, we like within the coaching, like it's very rare that you see people, writing out 6-week blocks at a time. You may plan ahead, you may move things in a certain direction, but the looking at the feedback week to week is important. But that in itself is a fine balance. You don't necessarily want to be playing everything off of the results from last week, but at the same time, you want to make sure that you are still being you're still observing what is going on, and you're still making sure that things are staying relevant to them. Because otherwise it's, especially in a sport as chaotic as CrossFit, it's I don't know how to describe it. It's like I suppose that, I've just over the last year done jiu-jitsu, which is chaos, like complete chaos. And the whole point of it is to throw yourself in chaotic situations to sort of get out of it. And I think CrossFit is chaos in a very controlled way, if that makes sense. It's not a triathlon, it's not a weightlifting competition where you sort of know exactly what you're going to get, but the sort of training and everything goes around it are sort of leaning more towards that than pure chaos. So what it is, it's almost like chaotic. It's a chaotic sport through structured means, essentially, and the way you train is, you've got to have that balance. And my sort of point being is that, within CrossFit, it's important that you have some element of sort of chaos, and that takes paying real close attention to what's going on. It's not just about putting things into place and then just letting the athlete do what they've got to do. But like with anything, there's a fine balance there.
What did you say about coaching is more about observation than something? I thought that was extremely profound enough that I don't, in fact, remember it.
I think I just said I don't think I said it was more about something. I just said that I think coaching is very much about it's just very important to be observing through stuff.
Yeah,
we can go back and we can listen to it again, and we can put it in the show notes.
But no, I think that's that really wraps up a lot of what we're talking about. Is that observing what's going on and having the appropriate communication in response to that, or the appropriate training program in response to that, or the appropriate encouragement to an athlete in response to that, or the appropriate, authoritative order barking in response to that, right? That each of those things potentially do have a place, and just being observant and making the correct choice based upon your observations is where this trust comes from, is how we build solid communication, and is how we design training programs that actually make sense for athletes. So I think that's a great way to sum it up. Thanks, Luke. Thanks for listening. While you're here, go ahead and head over to your podcast player, subscribe to the show, give it a rating, give it a review, all that good stuff. You can also go ahead and click through to the show notes where you can find out more about us at legionsc.com, and also follow us on Instagram at legion.sc.